You are probably within arm's reach of a battery right now. The phone you may be holding, the laptop you might be using, the wireless earbuds in their case, the smoke detector on the ceiling, the remote control for the television, the car in the driveway, now increasingly, the car itself. Batteries are everywhere, and we barely notice them until they run out. And when they run out, the particular frustration we feel, the low battery anxiety, the frantic search for a charger, the calculation of how much time we have left, tells us something about how completely we have come to depend on stored electrical energy. The battery is, in its simplest description, a device for storing energy chemically and releasing it as electricity. It is the technology that made portable electronics possible, that is now making electric vehicles viable, and that may, if developed far enough, make it possible to run entire electrical grids on renewable energy by storing the power generated on sunny and windy days for use on cloudy and still ones. The battery is not a new technology. The first practical battery was built in 1800. The chemistry that makes the lithium-ion battery in your phone work was worked out in the 1970s and 1980s by a researcher who would not receive the Nobel Prize for it until he was 97 years old. And the discovery that led indirectly to the first battery was made by a scientist who was studying the legs of dead frogs. This is that story. In the late 1770s, Luigi Galvani was a professor of anatomy at the University of Bologna. He was interested in the relationship between electricity and living tissue, a subject of considerable scientific curiosity in an era when Benjamin Franklin's experiments with lightning had established that electricity was a natural phenomenon and not merely a laboratory curiosity. In 1780, Galvani was conducting experiments with dissected frog legs. The specific circumstances of the discovery have been told in several versions, but the essential observation was this: when a metal scalpel touched the nerve of a dissected frog's leg while a static electricity machine was operating nearby, the leg twitched. The muscle contracted. The dead tissue responded to something. Galvani continued experimenting. He found that the frog legs would twitch when connected by metal conductors to a lightning rod during a thunderstorm. He found that they would twitch when connected by different metals, brass and iron, for instance. The twitching seemed to occur whenever an electric circuit was completed through the leg. Galvani's interpretation was that the twitching revealed the existence of what he called animal electricity, a form of electricity inherent to living tissue, stored in the muscles and nerves of animals, distinct from the atmospheric or frictional electricity that had been studied before. This interpretation was wrong, but it was productively wrong. It prompted a decade of experiments, vigorous scientific debate, and eventually the work of another Italian scientist who would show that the electricity was not coming from the frog at all. The scientist who corrected Galvani, and in doing so invented the battery, was Alessandro Volta. Alessandro Volta was a professor of physics at the University of Pavia. He was one of the leading electrical scientists of his era, known for his careful experimental work and his invention of the electrophorus, a device for generating static electricity. When Galvani's results were published in 1791, Volta was initially impressed. He repeated the experiments himself, and then he began to doubt Galvani's interpretation. Volta noticed something that Galvani had not fully explained. The twitching only occurred when two different metals were used in the circuit. When the same metal was used throughout, a single type of metal touching the nerve, the twitching was much weaker or absent. This was, Volta argued, not evidence of animal electricity. It was evidence that the two different metals, in contact with the moist tissue of the frog's leg, were generating electricity. The frog was not the source. The frog was the detector, an extraordinarily sensitive biological instrument for detecting the electric current generated by the contact of dissimilar metals in a conducting fluid. To prove his point, Volta needed to generate electricity without any animal tissue at all. He built a series of metal pairs, discs of zinc and silver, separated by cloth soaked in brine, stacked one on top of another. Each pair of metals in conducting fluid generated a small voltage. Stacked in series, the voltages added together. In 1800, Volta wrote a letter to the Royal Society in London describing his invention, the voltaic pile, a stack of metal discs and brine-soaked cloth that generated a continuous, steady electric current. It was the first battery. The voltaic pile was immediately recognized as one of the most important scientific instruments ever built. Unlike the Leyden jar and other devices for storing static electricity, which discharged their energy in a single violent spark, the voltaic pile produced a continuous current, a steady flow of electricity that could be used for sustained experiments. Within weeks of Volta's announcement, scientists across Europe were using voltaic piles to decompose water into hydrogen and oxygen by electrolysis, to produce new chemical elements, and to explore the relationship between electricity and chemistry that would eventually become the science of electrochemistry. The unit of electrical potential, the volt, is named for Volta. Before going further, let me explain what is actually happening inside a battery. A battery is a device that converts chemical energy into electrical energy. It does this through electrochemical reactions, chemical reactions that involve the transfer of electrons. A battery has two electrodes, a positive electrode called the cathode and a negative electrode called the anode, separated by an electrolyte, which is a substance that allows ions to move between the electrodes but does not allow electrons to pass through it directly. When the battery is connected to a circuit, a chemical reaction occurs at the anode that releases electrons. These electrons cannot pass through the electrolyte, so they travel through the external circuit, through your device, through the wire, from the anode to the cathode. At the cathode, another chemical reaction occurs that consumes those electrons. The flow of electrons through the external circuit is what we call electric current. The chemical reactions that drive this current gradually consume the reactive materials in the electrodes. When those materials are used up, the reactions stop, the current stops, and the battery is dead. In a rechargeable battery, the reactions are reversible. Applying an external current drives the reactions backward, restoring the reactive materials to their original states. This is what happens when you charge your phone. The key performance metrics of a battery are energy density, how much energy it can store per unit of weight or volume, and power density, how quickly it can deliver that energy. High energy density is what gives you a long-lasting battery. High power density is what gives you the ability to discharge quickly, important for applications like starting a car or accelerating an electric vehicle. The search for batteries with higher energy density, higher power density, longer cycle life, better safety, and lower cost is one of the most active areas of research in materials science today, and its history is longer and stranger than most people realize. After Volta's invention in 1800, the chemistry of batteries advanced through the 19th century in a series of improvements driven by the practical demands of telegraphy, industrial electrochemistry, and eventually electric lighting. The Daniell cell invented by the British chemist John Frederick Daniell in 1836, was the first battery reliable enough for sustained practical use. It used copper and zinc electrodes in separate copper sulfate and zinc sulfate solutions, with the solutions connected by a porous barrier. The Daniell cell produced a steady, reliable voltage of about 1.1 volts, and it was used extensively to power the telegraph networks that were spreading across Britain and America in the 1840s. Without the Daniell cell, the electric telegraph, the technology that first made real-time long-distance communication possible, would not have worked. The lead-acid battery, invented by the French physicist Gaston Planté in 1859, was the first rechargeable battery. It used lead and lead oxide electrodes in sulfuric acid. The lead-acid battery is still used today. It is the battery under the hood of almost every car with an internal combustion engine, providing the power to start the engine. 165 years after its invention, the lead-acid battery remains in mass production because no one has been able to make something cheaper that does its specific job as well. The nickel-cadmium battery, developed in the late 19th and early 20th century, offered higher energy density than lead-acid and longer cycle life, the number of times it could be charged and discharged before degrading. Nickel-cadmium batteries powered the first cordless tools, the first portable electronics. They also contained cadmium, a toxic heavy metal, which eventually led to their replacement. The nickel metal hydride battery, which replaced nickel-cadmium in many applications in the 1990s, avoided the toxicity problem and became the battery of choice for the first generation of hybrid electric vehicles, including the original Toyota Prius. Each battery chemistry represented a solution to specific constraints. What materials were available, what voltage was needed, how much weight could be tolerated, how many times it needed to be recharged. The battery that changed everything came from a specific problem posed in the 1970s. Could you make a battery small enough, light enough, and energy-dense enough to power something that could fit in a pocket? In October 1973, the members of OPEC imposed an oil embargo on the United States and other nations that had supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War. The price of oil quadrupled, gas stations ran dry, cars lined up for blocks. The American economy, which had been built on cheap oil, was suddenly confronted with the possibility that cheap oil would not always be available. The energy crisis prompted a wave of research into alternative energy sources and energy storage. If the United States was going to reduce its dependence on foreign oil, it needed electric vehicles, and electric vehicles needed better batteries. At Stanford Research Institute and at Exxon's Corporate Research Laboratory, chemists began working on a new kind of battery, one that used lithium, the lightest metal on the periodic table, as the electrode material. Lithium offered extraordinary theoretical energy density. A lithium-based battery could, in principle, store far more energy per kilogram than any battery then available. The researcher who made the crucial breakthrough was a British-born chemist named M. Stanley Whittingham, working at Exxon. In 1976, Whittingham demonstrated a rechargeable battery using a lithium anode and a titanium disulfide cathode, a layered material that could absorb and release lithium ions as the battery charged and discharged. Whittingham's battery worked. It had impressive energy density. It also had a serious problem. Lithium metal, when used as an electrode in a rechargeable battery, tends to form dendritic growths, needle-like crystals, as it is deposited during charging. These dendrites can eventually pierce the separator between the electrodes, causing a short circuit. A short circuit in a lithium battery releases its stored energy very quickly. In the wrong circumstances, this means fire. The lithium metal battery was promising and dangerous. The promise attracted researchers. The danger kept them from deploying it at scale. John Bannister Goodenough was born in Jena, Germany, in 1922. He studied mathematics at Yale, served in the Second World War as a meteorologist, and then turned to physics, earning a doctorate from the University of Chicago in 1952. He worked for more than 20 years at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory before moving to Oxford in 1976. And in 1980, at the age of 57, he made one of the most important discoveries in the history of materials science. Goodenough recognized that the problem with Whittingham's battery was not the concept of lithium-ion insertion into a layered material. It was the specific materials being used. He systematically investigated alternative cathode materials, and in 1980, he published a paper demonstrating that lithium cobalt oxide, a layered oxide material, could serve as a cathode for a lithium battery with significantly higher voltage than Whittingham's titanium disulfide. Higher voltage meant more energy per unit of weight. Goodenough's lithium cobalt oxide cathode was the key component that made practical lithium-ion batteries possible. He published his results. He did not patent them. The work was done at Oxford, and the university did not pursue patent protection for the discovery. The research was openly available. A decade later, researchers at Sony in Japan used Goodenough's lithium cobalt oxide cathode, combined with a carbon anode developed by Akira Yoshino, to build the first commercial lithium-ion battery. Sony released it in 1991 in a camcorder. The lithium-ion battery, the battery in your phone, your laptop, your wireless headphones, your electric car, is built on Goodenough's cathode material. Goodenough did not share significantly in the commercial rewards of this discovery. He remained an academic. He continued working. In 2019, at the age of 97, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, shared with M. Stanley Whittingham and Akira Yoshino, for the development of lithium-ion batteries. He remains the oldest person ever to receive a Nobel Prize.
He was still working.
And here is the part of the story that almost no one knows. In his 90s, Goodenough made a second major discovery. Working with a team at the University of Texas, he developed what he claimed was a solid-state battery, a battery using a solid electrolyte rather than a liquid or gel, that potentially offered even higher energy density and better safety than conventional lithium-ion batteries. The work was controversial. Some researchers disputed the results. The peer review process was heated. Goodenough died in June 2023 at the age of 100, still working on solid-state battery technology. Whether his final research program will prove as transformative as his 1980 discovery is not yet known. What is known is that a man born in 1922 who received his Nobel Prize at 97 was still trying to make batteries better when he died at 100. The history of the battery is not just a history of chemistry. It is, in part, a history of stubbornness. The lithium-ion battery in your phone is a remarkable piece of engineering, and understanding what it actually does helps explain both why it is so useful and why it sometimes catches fire. A lithium-ion battery has a cathode. In most consumer devices, a lithium metal oxide, often lithium cobalt oxide, or a variant, a carbon anode, and a liquid or gel electrolyte that conducts lithium ions between the electrodes. When the battery discharges, when you use your phone, lithium ions move from the anode through the electrolyte to the cathode, and electrons flow through the external circuit. When you charge the battery, the process reverses. Lithium ions move back to the anode. The key advantage of lithium-ion over previous battery technologies is energy density. Lithium is the lightest metal on the periodic table, and lithium-ion batteries can store roughly 2 to 3 times more energy per kilogram than nickel metal hydride batteries, and roughly 5 to 10 times more than lead-acid batteries. This is why your phone can run for a day on a battery that weighs a few tens of grams, while a lead-acid car battery weighing 15 kilograms can only start an engine rather than power a vehicle for long distances. The disadvantage is thermal instability under certain conditions. If a lithium-ion battery is overcharged, over-discharged, physically damaged, or subjected to excessive heat, the electrolyte can decompose and produce gases, leading to a process called thermal runaway, a self-sustaining reaction that generates heat faster than it can be dissipated, potentially resulting in fire. This is why lithium-ion batteries contain complex battery management systems, electronics that monitor voltage, temperature, and current, and prevent the battery from being driven outside its safe operating range. It is also why airlines restrict the transport of large lithium-ion batteries in checked baggage. The limitations of current lithium-ion technology, relatively slow charging, capacity degradation over hundreds of charge cycles, safety concerns with liquid electrolytes, are driving the research into next-generation batteries that Goodenough was working on at the end of his life. Solid-state batteries, sodium-ion batteries, lithium-sulfur batteries, and others. The battery in your pocket is the best available answer to a problem that engineers and chemists have been working on for more than 2 centuries. It is not the final answer. The story of the battery is, in 2025, becoming a story about something much larger than a phone or a car. The fundamental challenge of renewable energy is intermittency. The sun does not always shine. The wind does not always blow. Solar panels and wind turbines generate electricity when the resource is available, not necessarily when it is needed. On a sunny afternoon, a grid powered by solar may generate more electricity than is being consumed. On a still, cloudy evening, it may generate almost none. This mismatch between supply and demand, always present in electricity systems, but far more pronounced in systems with high proportions of renewable generation, is the central engineering challenge of the energy transition. The solution is storage. Store the electricity when there is surplus. Release it when there is deficit. If you have enough storage, you can build an electricity grid that runs entirely on variable renewable sources and still provides reliable power at all times. The question is how much storage you need and what technology can provide it at sufficient scale and acceptable cost. Lithium-ion batteries are currently the dominant technology for grid-scale electrical storage. Facilities with hundreds of megawatt-hours of lithium-ion storage are being built in California, Australia, and elsewhere. They can respond to changes in grid demand within milliseconds, faster than any other technology. But lithium-ion at grid scale has constraints. Lithium and cobalt are not unlimited resources. Mining them has environmental and geopolitical consequences. The batteries degrade over time. The energy density, while impressive for portable devices, may not be optimal for stationary storage, where weight matters less than cost and longevity. The alternatives being developed include flow batteries, large tanks of liquid electrolyte that can be scaled almost arbitrarily, iron-air batteries that use the rusting and derusting of iron as the electrochemical cycle, and various other chemistries designed specifically for long-duration stationary storage. The battery that enables the energy transition does not yet exist at the scale needed. It is being built in research laboratories and in factories by engineers who are in some sense the direct successors of Volta, stacking his metal discs in Pavia in 1800, and Goodenough working out cathode materials at Oxford in 1980. The problem of storing energy has been with us since the first battery. The stakes of solving it have never been higher.
The history of the battery
Has its own pattern of unacknowledged contribution. Goodenough himself, whose cathode material is in virtually every lithium-ion battery ever made, waited until the age of 97 for the Nobel Prize. The recognition came late, though it came. Others were less fortunate. Rachid Yazami, a French-Moroccan scientist, independently developed the carbon anode that is the other half of the lithium-ion battery, the part that holds the lithium on the anode side. Akira Yoshino is usually given credit for combining the cathode and anode into the first practical cell. Yazami has argued, with supporting documentation, that his contribution to the anode chemistry was not adequately credited in the Nobel citation. Akira Yoshino, who did receive the Nobel, has been generous in acknowledging the contributions of those who came before him. The development of the lithium-ion battery was a collective achievement. Whittingham's proof of concept, Goodenough's cathode, Yazami and Yoshino's anode development, Sony's manufacturing innovation, and the Nobel, by its three-person limit, cannot fully represent a field built by dozens.
The battery has also been shaped by people
who rarely appear in histories of technology. The manufacturing engineers who figured out how to produce lithium-ion cells reliably and cheaply at scale, the recycling researchers who are working on how to recover the lithium and cobalt from spent batteries at end of life, the logistics specialists who manage the supply chains for the critical minerals that battery chemistry requires. Batteries are made of materials that have to be mined somewhere, processed somewhere, assembled somewhere, used somewhere, and eventually disposed of somewhere. The geography of that supply chain, the lithium in Chile and Australia, the cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the manufacturing in China, is itself a story of geopolitics, labor conditions, and environmental consequences that does not appear in the standard account of how the battery was invented. Every battery carries a history of choices, about where to source materials, about who bears the environmental cost of extraction, about how to handle toxicity at end of life. The technology is remarkable. The full story of where it comes from is more complicated than the remarkable technology. There is something almost magical about a battery. Not in any mystical sense, the chemistry is well understood, the physics is straightforward, but in the sense that it makes a kind of impossible-seeming thing possible.
energy cannot be created.
It can only be converted from one form to another. Coal burns and releases energy that was stored chemically over millions of years of geological time. The sun shines because of nuclear fusion reactions that have been occurring for 4.5 billion years. Wind blows because of temperature differences created by the sun's uneven heating of the Earth's surface. A battery takes energy from any of these sources, or from the grid that collects it, and stores it in chemical form, ready to be released as electricity when needed. Luigi Galvani's frog legs twitched in 1780 because dissimilar metals in conducting fluid generate a small voltage. Alessandro Volta understood why and built the first battery in 1800. John Goodenough solved the cathode problem in 1980 and enabled the portable electronics revolution. The researchers working in laboratories today are trying to solve the storage problem that the clean energy transition requires. 2 centuries of work. Frog legs to grid storage. The same problem at larger and larger scales. The phone in your pocket has a battery that would have seemed miraculous to Volta, a device the size of a thumbnail that stores enough energy to power a computer more capable than anything that existed in 1980 for an entire day. And the battery in that phone is already being superseded by designs that will make it look primitive. The chemistry is still surprising us. The arc of battery development points in one direction. More energy, stored more safely, for longer, at lower cost. Each generation of battery has enabled things that the previous generation could not. What the next generation will enable is not yet known, but Galvani's frog legs are still twitching, in a sense. The problem is still being worked. The power is still being stored. And somewhere, in a lab filled with quiet light and unfinished experiments, someone is still trying to make it better.